Hello everybody and welcome back to the Fintech Power 50. We are here at Sibos 2022 and I'm very happy to be joined again by Leda Glyptis of 10x Banking. Leda, how are you?
I am great and I'm so happy to be here with you. You know, this morning I was looking at my meetings of the day and when I got to ours I was like,
yeah. Last time we spoke was at Fintech Week London.
That's right, which feels like it was years ago, but it wasn't. It was only a few months.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy how time goes. What are you thinking of Sibos so far? You held 2 panel sessions.
I did. So it's our first in-person Sibos in a few years. And it's very nice to be back. There's always a family reunion feel to it. It's very funny to hear the banks are saying they're extremely busy. The startups are saying that it feels bigger than London and it's actually half the size. And the veterans are saying, oh, it feels different. And I think it's a testament to everyone having been away for so long. But it's nice to be here. There's a very nice blend of sort of the old crew and a lot of folks that are new to us as a business. And Sibos is very special in that there are a lot of decision makers here. There's a very big banking representation for folks like us who want to talk to those banks. It's the perfect place to be.
Oh, beautiful. Well, in case any of our viewers missed you at Fintech Week London, why don't you give us a little bit of an insight into who you are and what your position at 10x Banking is?
Of course, and thank you for that. So, 10x Banking is a cloud-native core banking system plus, as someone described it yesterday. We play in that cloud-native core banking space, but we approach the problem a little bit differently. We offer a fully managed service that takes away a lot of the complexity that we consider utility, the stuff that you absolutely need to in order to run a digital capability that is scaled and secure, that is absolutely essential, but it's not differentiate to either your consumer bank or your commercial bank. It's stuff that you need to be running perfectly, running smoothly, running consistently and constantly, but you don't have to build it. So we're a bit more than a just core banking system, taking all of that space and solving for it in a sort of SaaS model. I'm the Chief Client Officer, so I work with our sales and marketing teams, with our delivery teams, with existing clients, and with our compliance and regulatory teams, so that we ensure that our customers are compliant in all their individual jurisdictions.
Fantastic, what an insight. Thank you very much for that. So, Leda, progressive finance for a changing world. That's our theme at Sibos this year.
It is.
How does 10x Banking fit in with that theme?
We really do believe that we solve for it. I mean, that's a bold statement that I appreciate, but we really think that from our point of view, we solve for it in 2 ways. For me, when we talk about progressive finance, it's both about what you deliver and how you deliver it. So a lot of the sessions we've been hearing have been around financial inclusion, fairness, resilience, and because we're in a transaction banking world, it's not financial inclusion at the individual level, it's at the community level. How do you digitize pieces of trade finance to make it smoother? There were some really poignant examples that emerged through COVID where the slightly antiquated habits of trade finance that meant that ships that didn't have a digital bill of lading couldn't offload during the pandemic. There is a very real impact to the community waiting for food, equipment. So there has been a very clear sense of how the infrastructure solves for the problem. So the 2 angles of progressive finance have been, one, how do we as an institutional set of players see the impact we have on the world? And I think there's been some interesting thinking on that. And the second piece is what needs to be true for us to be able to deliver against this. And as I said, 10x solves for this in 2 ways. The one is the utility. We take a lot of the complexity, we bring speed and lower cost and definitely than building it yourself and definitely than doing it with most of the incumbents, so that you can solve the complex problems of how do I do this. And that's a big uplift, both in terms of speed and things you need to solve for. The second way is the flexibility, because we think. I mean, I don't want to turn this into a product pitch, but I do think that one of the things that we firmly believe in and we feel very strongly about at 10x is that we have taken a lot of our habits of old into the future. So for instance, how we think about customers, how we think about party, as we tell it, not that kind of party, has been, and you see it in a lot of the challengers in our space, has reflected the way we used to think about it in the past. So your customer view is fragmented across the silos of the organization and the systems you use to serve in, which means that in order to provide fully digitally integrated solutions, both from a user experience but also from a pricing and processing experience, you need to rethink that vertical. So one of the things that we've done differently is we think about that customer component differently, which we really think reduces a lot of that complexity. It makes it easier to do the stuff you need to do. And as the stuff that you need to do as a bank keeps changing and keeps getting more complicated, you want the tooling that you do it with to not add complexity to the mix. And that's where I really think we play to our strengths.
Well, you couldn't be in a better place than Sibos in that instance. I mean, of course, it's quite tricky to predict the future that the banks will face. I mean, but right now it's quite an uncertain time for banks. It's very quite turbulent, I think. And from your perspective, in terms of technology and innovation, you know, how should the banks be navigating such an environment?
It's a very good question, a very poignant one. We, at the opening plenary of Sibos, the chair of Sibos was very sober about this all, and I actually think it was essential for people to hear that we're not escaping, because there is such a beautiful, buzzing, uplifting atmosphere, and the tone was set very early on, and I think that was very salutary. And exactly as you say, we've survived a pandemic. In fact, a lot of us haven't. But lived through unprecedented events. There's a global supply chain crisis, which has been exacerbated by the energy crisis. There's a global war that nobody really sees the end to. A cost of living crisis off the charts. In that context, he raised two questions which I thought were interesting. Banks have shown themselves to be resilient. Have we shown ourselves to be innovative enough? And what do you do next? So to answer your question, take a step back. In that context, we didn't come in fresh as daisies. Innovation and fintech as a journey is 15 years old in most banks. And there has been false starts and genuine successes and mistakes. But before this turbulent period started, I think we would all agree that we were not, as an industry, where we wanted to be. Enter left, one of the most turbulent periods in human history, with event upon event piling to add complexity and strain on resources. And you come out of this going, oh my God. So it is important to think about that double impact, right? Because we were not at a perfect place and got knocked back for 6. We were already behind where we knew we wanted to be, where the economy wanted us to be, and where the regulator wanted us to be, I mean as an industry, and this knocked us for 6. Yeah. So we emerge from this, and I'll tell you what I'd like to hear, I'd like you what I'm seeing, and I'll tell you what I don't like to hear. What I'd like to hear is people staring into the things that were exceptionally hard during COVID and going, no matter how complex life is, I need to fix those. So for instance, if you were on 10x and you needed to do a mortgage payment holiday, like almost every government needed to, it would be a matter of 5 minutes to get the new rates in, the new timelines in, the complete break or the reduced break, all the provisions and caveats and rules, and feed it through the workflow to have it approved. We were speaking to a bank we know very well at the time, whose mortgage systems are not yet on 10x, not one of our existing clients. They needed a team of 12 engineers, COBOL engineers, some of them to come out of retirement and work for 6 weeks solidly through the week and weekend. And that's stark, right? And the reality is that mortgage systems haven't historically been where you invest, because it's not something that requires real-time connectivity. It's not something that requires that real once you've been onboarded. So it's been neglected in favor of other solutions. But I think that is a very, very stark example of of things that we know without the shadow of a doubt that it's not innovation for improvement, it's innovation for survival. If we had another world-defining event like we've just had, at which point do you reach breaking point? So I do think that what I'd like to hear is people taking a long, hard look at both the constraints and aspirations and go, I'm going for it. And I'm not going for it with POCs and little plays. I'm going for it. So a couple of months ago, actually, when we last met, we had just announced that we will be doing the transaction banking work with Westpac. Yeah. For me, that is exactly, obviously I would say that, but it is exactly what you want to see. A bank going, I see how the world is shifting. I know what I need to deliver for my clients. And I know I can't do it with technology that didn't exist when, the technology that was created when the things I want to do didn't exist. That's the right order. You can't stretch technology that is just not designed for something to do it. So what I'd like to see is that energy, that vision, that focus. Don't do 100 things. Do the important things, but do them all the way down and all the way across. What I am seeing a lot of is fatigue. And I understand it 100% because the world has gotten more complex. And I don't just mean because of the period of disruption. I also mean that when we started this journey, I remember being at Sibos 15 years ago maybe. Yeah. And talking about APIs as the new frontier. Because they were at the time, and banks needed to wrap their head around it. But each year, the technological toolkit expands, the ways of working change, the speed with which things come to market and some new entrants move at, and the regulator is learning so fast. So what I'm seeing is fatigue. A lot of people going, it was hard before, it got harder, and the world got bigger. Yeah. And I think that focus that I was talking about is going to be super important. What I'm hearing a lot is displacement also, and I don't like to hear that. I had a chat with a friend who works on this very passionately about the disproportionate focus on the metaverse that we've heard in the last couple of days. It is absolutely fascinating. It is interesting. We should be thinking about it. But you can't help but wonder whether some of it is a little bit of displacement because the stuff we have to do is hard and we're nowhere near done. Yeah. But time is a non-replenishable resource. And if that's the one thing we take away from the last few years of disruption, it should be that time can only be our friend if we use it. And we're never going to have more time. We will have more of almost everything else, but time is not one thing you can ever have more of.
That's a really, really interesting point to raise, and everything that you've said so far has been really, really fascinating. Just circling back to transaction banking, why do you think the corporate banks are so behind the digital curve, and how do you see attitudes developing? I mean, you touched upon that in your previous answer.
A little bit of the original innovation came either slightly out of the industry or from sort of people who weren't particularly immersed in the industry but had some experience and were like, I can do this better. And it started very close to experiences that you could have even as a layperson. So you don't need to be a banker to know that your retail bank could definitely look better and be more user-friendly. So a lot of the innovation we had at the beginning was around, and I mean like 10, 15 years ago, was around user experience. Remember peer-to-peer lending? Maybe you weren't even born then. But all of the early innovations weren't even new ways of doing banking. It was new ways of it just making it more accessible. And then you started going down deeper into what actually having a truly digital bank looks like. And that was difficult, that was complicated, but people started doing it. So I think we're just going up the complexity curve. Okay. Because for transaction banking, maybe the volumes of transactions are not as high as a big consumer bank, but the values and the implications to sovereigns and businesses if you get it wrong would be catastrophic. So you needed to go through the learning curve. You needed to see those systems and those technologies that were new 10 years ago work not just at scale but in a fully regulated environment. Have those proof points and then also start cutting your teeth in terms of imagination. Like you're speaking to some of our clients and some of the folks on the ground who I hope will be our clients soon about how they're thinking about liquidity management now that they understand the art of the possible in terms of real-time technology, and it's so energizing. But I think you have to do the hard yards. You can't skip it. So I genuinely think that's the curve of maturity that we needed to go through for this to even be possible. But we're here now.
We're here.
We're here now, yeah.
And, I mean, you've spoken about the maturity and the adoption and awareness of certain technologies in your answers so far. But in terms of your corporate banking clients, what do you see to be the most prevalent challenges that they face, and why are they coming to 10x banking to find solutions for this problem?
Because we're the best.
Yeah, of course.
We're the best. Let me answer that first, because it sort of feeds into. There are three. I mean, there are many things I could pick out on, but let me. 3 is a good number. So one is 10x has been designed from the get-go, and unlike quite a few of our competitors, to tackle the sort of top end of the complexity curve, both in terms of the scalability and complexity of the platform, the demand and standards that we expect that our clients would have for resilience and security. A lot of the sort of new entrants in our space went for a much simpler type of client first and anticipated to go up the complexity curve. That's actually understandable but very hard. If we started at the top end of the complexity curve, so we are an animal designed for this kind of complexity, this kind of resiliency, which appeals to the transaction banking clients. The second thing is that there are quite a few of us inside 10x that grew up in this space. And I was talking to one of my old colleagues yesterday, and I was saying one of the things I love about Sibos is you see so many familiar spaces. It's familiar faces, and you have to correct that. You see so many familiar faces, and she was saying that's because there's so much of this industry that has such a degree of specialization that people tend to be very settled in their roles and their careers, and it's a very small pool of people. If you think about, I mean, I grew up at BNY Mellon, and I'm probably the most devoted alum, and I have a lot of affection for the company and the business in the space. Anthony, our CEO, used to run the transaction banking business in the US for Citi. Okay. So we have a lot of transaction banking muscle, a lot of transaction banking alums. So we come into this complexity having lived it, and I do think there is a differentiation then, because you can, the credibility is not feigned or recently learned. We've been in the trenches of this work. And then the third one is that we've jumped into it with absolute commitment, not to just stretch what we had done before, as we've seen some folks do, but really solve the problems of this space at scale, and some of them are very peculiar to transaction banking. And this space of finance. And I do think that part of it is that expertise, part of it is our DNA, and part of it is that we absolutely chose to dedicate ourselves to it.
Well, what's your opinion on the direction of embedded finance in the corporate space?
I actually think that embedded finance will come into its own in the corporate space, because there are some really, really interesting use cases about embedded finance in the retail space, but most of them are either BNPL or embedded payments a la Uber, or some sort of embedded insurance. We haven't seen the blend. Like, one of the things I'd love to see is if you're taking a trip, your FX volatility, your conversion, your insurance for the trip, and the payments for everything actually being a set of blended experiences. But actually, I think we're more likely to see that in trade finance first.
Oh, really?
Because these would be substantial enough values for someone to pilot it. Whereas if someone tries to pilot it for me coming to Sibos, they'll find that there's just too much variation. So I think there is some components of truly embedding financial services beyond just payments that in the corporate world, because the relationships are so meaty and each one is so big, you will see it reach scale faster. So I do think that we're going to see in embedded payments for corporates, we're going to see a lot of activity. And I actually think we will see some really interesting stuff out of trade finance.
Oh, fantastic. Well, yes, it's a good prediction to make, and I think I'm definitely in the same boat as you in direction to embedded finance. Finally, Leda, I think we'd be very foolish to have you sat in front of us and not dig you a little bit about the secrets of digital transformation. I mean, what do you see as being the main components of that?
I mean, it would be easy to say, so I'm going to say a lot of other things, but mostly it's people. So it's the talent that will help you build it, it's the talent that will help you drive it, it's the leadership that won't lose focus, because there is organizational inertia that will get in the way. Digital transformation is hard work, it takes a long time, it's complicated, so you need new skill sets, you need to balance what you're doing with running the existing business, and you need to sort of get out of your own way with consistent leadership. I've actually got a book coming out early next year on exactly that, so I'm so glad you asked that. So yeah, look out for a book called Bankers Like Us early next year, because that is what it takes. I think for a very long time the industry had approached it as a technical question, and I was very much part of that journey, because we as an industry hadn't anticipated 10, 15 years ago how much that the digital transformation journey would change business models, pricing models, distribution models. We genuinely at the beginning looked at digital toolkits as exactly that, ways of doing the work better.
Yeah.
But it became apparent very quickly that it was transformation. It wasn't just a transformation of your systems, it was a transformation of your business. So that's complicated. Imagining your position, your usefulness, your profitability with a brand new pricing model, with a brand new engagement and distribution model, with a competition landscape that is shifting at the same time as you. There's a lot of unknowns. So I would say that because there are so many questions to be answered, it's the people who are looking at them, who are being honest about what they see, who are bringing the learnings back in a consistent way, who are not applying our sort of old school mindsets to the new problems, and are constantly course correcting, because we're not going to a fixed destination. We don't know what the end state looks like. The competition is changing alongside you, so you don't know, are you doing well? Are you doing, like, are these the laggards or are they the best ones? So you need to be constantly revisiting, and that's tiring. And it's also unsettling, and it is sadly not for everyone. So the people you put in that journey are extremely important. Their skill sets, their mental and emotional resilience, the way they work, and the leadership you wrap around them to help them go through what is a absolutely fascinating journey, but really hard. And we're nowhere near done.
No. Well, this has been a really, really fantastic insight, Leda. Thank you so much
for having me.
For taking the time to come and visit us today. And I wish you all the best of luck with the rest of Sibos.
You've got
a very busy schedule ahead of you.
Thank you for having me.